Svitlana, you are a role model in so many ways and clearly a constant reminder that not even a war needs to stop society from thinking forward and act on climate change. Aren't you getting angry with politicians across the world not understanding the immense time pressure we are under to stick to a 1.5 degree path? What is your advice to them?
Well, I should say that I'm not angry because, well, angry is it's not the right word. I'm disappointed. It's true. So I would like them to learn much more and to think much more about this climate change problem, because actually it's much bigger problem. And I should say that 5 years ago, I said to Ukrainian journalists that climate change is worse than terrorist attack, because of the number of victims, in fact, and people impacted by climate change. At the same time, I should say, with this full-scale war, with invasion of Russia to Ukraine, of course, it's much bigger now scale of this terrorist attack of terrorist country which we neighboring. And I'm thinking about changing my mind. But for other countries, for politicians in other countries, of course, they first of all, as Ukrainian actually scientists, I want support and I want to stop this war and free my country. But at the same time, I understand that climate change will not stop even of this war, and war just exacerbate all crises. And I am very threatened. In fact, I'm not angry, but I'm threatened with the money which goes to weapons, but not to mitigate and adapt to climate change. I don't have actually a solution for this, to be honest. I believe that politicians know better how make our world more safe. We as scientists can only provide them guidance with our knowledge, but decision for them. And I really hope they will make very wise decision and actually will manage the world more safer pathway.
Thank you. I remember our IPCC approval plenary in March last year with a highly professional Ukrainian delegation, and you speaking at the closing plenary a day after the massacre in Bucha. Can you give us some insights on how you work in these difficult times?
It's indeed difficult times. It's even, you cannot imagine how difficult it is when you well, I can say that especially this last May, it was awful because of so many attacks. We had so little sleep. But anyway, we in this situation, again, as climate scientists, I understand that we definitely will win this war against Russia. But again, climate change will not stop, and we will need to win this another war, which will have much more victims. Yeah, for this we are working actually. And this, I understand that with my work as climatologist, I can put together causes actually of climate change and this war. So it's in finding actually this war. This what I discovered and point out from the very beginning, in fact, that the war and climate change they have the same roots. So it's fossil fuel war, in fact. So it's our dependence as human on fossil fuel, and it is enabler actually of this war and possibility of Russian army to be supposed to be, let's say, second in the world. Now it's under question, in fact. It was extremely difficult for me to speak after I know about my colleagues actually killed on the front line. It's psychologically very difficult. I should say it's just concentrate on the work. I have problem, and my colleagues, we have problem with memory, with concentration. Of course, we cannot, you know, we see all this news and especially for Bucha. I should say, when I made this speech, if be honest, I was so much concentrated on my work in IPCC that I didn't see, in fact, all this news on Bucha. Otherwise, I don't know how I could, say all what I said at that time. After I was speechless for 1 week. It's true story.
But it was a fantastic work you've done there, and I think it was also the speech at the plenary is something that moved us all.
If I may, I should say just the difference between our enemy, let's say, our invaders and us. So from the very first days, I was thinking about future. So I was thinking about how we will rebuild what they destroy, how we will live in future. But they want us to put in the past, and they want this Soviet Union, which is in the past. So this is the big difference. We are thinking about the future, and I want this future not only for Ukraine. I want this future for all other countries, because I understand that one country cannot be happy when others actually suffering.
Yeah, you know that Germanwatch has been collaborating with Ukrainian civil society since 2016, focusing on just transition, in particular in the energy sector. Can you give us some insights and your opinion on civil society engagement in Ukraine in the current situation? You just mentioned that you are thinking about the future, but is there currently room for discussion on just transition in Ukraine post-war, or is that too early?
No, it's not too early, because again, we are speaking about and we are thinking about this future. We are pretty sure that we need to rebuild, and even we speak not about rebuilding and even not about recovering. We are speaking about recreation of Ukraine. So fully other background and basis. We won't be climate neutral. We want to, we as climate scientists, we promote it. We say that it's much safer, in fact, to be climate resilient, because climate change, again, is going on. So we will have much worse, actually, consequences very soon. So we need to be prepared, as the same way as we were prepared for this invasion, in fact, because the war started not in 24th of February, it started in 2014 in Ukraine, in fact. And all this time we were preparing, so we were adapting, and we need now this adaptation to climate change to be prepared for consequences. And it's nobody, I guess, or almost all didn't believe that Russia will invade Ukraine, but it happened. So the same with climate change. So people don't consider it seriously, but it will happen. And we as scientists, we definitely know that we will have much worse consequences, actually, very soon. So we need to be prepared. We need to, to speak through these organizations, these NGOs and journalists, and everywhere. Literally, everyone should be prepared. As we in Ukraine, I put my bag with emergency bag, and we were prepared for this invasion, even during this IPCC session.
We are given this Brücke-Mensche today from the Association of Journalists in the Bonn region. I personally very much hope that we will feel that they should receive an award in the near future, because they played a crucial role in explaining the transformation and telling the stories of just transition. What is your advice to journalists in Germany and worldwide?
Well, actually, speak truth and don't try to undermine facts, and don't actually try to find some alternative view on what is at the moment is matter of fact, and actually maybe simplify some messages of scientists, but with the help of scientists, because it should be really clear what to do and what not. And in terms of actually just transition, we should understand that there are immediate needs, as we actually had in this winter time with blackouts in Ukraine, and it was awful to see all these generators on the streets of cities in Ukraine. But at the same time, it was emergency situation. But if we made before this just transition, we could have much better preparedness with renewables. And from my actually perspective, when I started to prepare to this blackout, I started actually early in autumn. So we bought solar panels and put on the roof of my house. So I was prepared for these blackouts and I had light in my house. So journalists should make this real story about sustainability, about resilience for people, and people should understand this. Society should be educated, and with the solutions which are already actually on the table, and they're really affordable. This and much more resilient. So this this decentralized generation of energy, especially. Because again, our experience that if you have solar farm and it's destroyed 20%, other 80% will generate. If you have one like nuclear power station or some other station like hydropower now, one terrorist attack and you have thousands of people out of everything actually, not only energy but water. So if these people could have some alternative, generation, they will be much better prepared. It was the case on our occupied territories where there were much more advanced people with solar farms. They had electricity, they had actually connection, they knew what to do, and they survived after all. So this is the matter of surviving in this situation. So journalists should take this and actually they have this means as media to promote much more resilient and safe way of living now.
Thank you, Svitlana. Stay strong, and we pray for peace in Ukraine.
Thank you.